The night my mother's voice cut through the house, "Get out and never come back." I froze. Her words weren't anger, they were knives. I walked out with nothing but silence clinging to my chest. Weeks later, when my father found me, his question shattered me more than her scream. "Why did you stop coming home?" He never knew the truth until that day. Oban sat quietly at the dinner table, as he always did, careful not to take too much space, careful not to speak too loudly. His sister Zina sat across from him, glowing with the praise their mother never spared her. That night, the family gathered with relatives, the air heavy with food and laughter, until suddenly his mother's voice rose above it all. Her eyes, sharp with anger, fixed on Oban. She shouted at him, her words cutting deeper than any wound. "Get out and never come back." The room froze, plates clattered, voices hushed, and every gaze turned toward him. Oban's heart pounded, as if the walls themselves were closing in. He searched the faces around the table, hoping someone would defend him, but all he saw were shocked eyes and lowered heads. His father stayed silent, his lips pressed tight. His mother's fury filled every corner, drowning out the years of silence Oban had endured. Zina's hand twitched, as if she wanted to reach for him, but fear held her back. The laughter of moments ago turned into a painful silence. The food lost its taste, the air lost its warmth. Oban felt the ground slipping beneath him, as his mother's command echoed again in his chest. He wanted to ask why, to beg for a reason, but the words refused to leave his mouth. Humiliation wrapped around him like chains as the relatives shifted uncomfortably, their eyes refusing to meet his. That night, Oban realized something he had always tried to ignore. He was never truly wanted at that table. Her scream wasn't just anger, it was rejection, and in that moment, surrounded by family yet utterly alone, he felt his world collapse. Oban stepped out of the house with his heart beating painfully in his chest. His mother's words still echoed in his ears. "Get out and never come back." He didn't take anything with him, not a bag, not even his shoes. He just walked, his hands shaking, his feet touching the cold ground. The night was quiet, the streets empty, but inside him there was a storm he could not calm. Every step felt heavy, as if the earth itself did not want him to move forward. Yet he kept walking because there was no place left for him behind. The moonlight followed him, casting his shadow long and lonely across the road. He thought about the table he had just left, the faces of the relatives who looked away, the silence of his father, and the burning anger of his mother. It all replayed in his head again and again, like a wound that refused to close. He wondered if maybe he had done something so unforgivable, but then he realized he had only ever been himself, and somehow that was never enough for her. As the cool night air brushed against his face, Oban felt both free and broken. For years he had called that house his home, but tonight the truth hit him hard. It was never really his home. It was a place where his presence was tolerated, not cherished, a place where his voice was unheard, where love was measured, and where his mother saw him as nothing more than a shadow. That house had been a cage, and her scream was the key that unlocked it, pushing him out into the unknown. He didn't know where he was going or what tomorrow would look like. All he knew was that he had no one to return to, no door waiting open for him. But even in his fear, there was a strange strength rising inside. The world ahead was uncertain. The night was long, but for the first time, he understood that walking away might be the only way to ever find himself. Oban sat by the roadside, his knees pulled close to his chest, his eyes staring at the empty road ahead. The night had grown colder, and his bare feet were covered in dust. Hunger twisted his stomach, but what hurt more was the memory of his mother's voice chasing him out. He felt invisible, like a discarded shadow no one wanted. Just when he thought he would collapse from exhaustion, an elderly woman carrying a small basket stopped and looked at him. Her name was Mama Deka, a widow known in the community for living a simple, quiet life. She saw the boy trembling and asked softly if he was lost. Oban could not speak at first. Shame held his throat tight, but she noticed the tears on his face, and without pressing further, she gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "Come with me, child," she said. Her voice carried no anger, no judgment, only concern. Oban followed slowly, still unsure if he deserved such kindness. Mama Deka's home was small, made of mud walls and a tin roof, yet it felt warmer than the house he had lived in all his life. She lit a small lantern, offered him water, and shared with him the little food she had saved for herself. When she noticed his shivering body, she pulled out an old blanket and wrapped it around him as if he were her own son. For the first time in years, Oban felt safe. There was no shouting, no comparing, no cold stares, only silence filled with care. That night, as he lay on a simple mat, Oban realized that family was not always the people who shared your blood. Sometimes it was found in strangers who had nothing yet gave you everything that mattered. Mama Deka had no wealth, but her kindness was richer than anything Oban had ever known at his mother's table. In her home, Oban learned what it meant to be seen and accepted without condition. He was not treated as a burden or a mistake. He was simply treated as a human being worthy of care. And though he had lost the place he once called home, in Mama Deka's shelter, he discovered something far greater, a glimpse of the love he had been searching for all his life. Back at home, Zina sat quietly in her room, still shaken by the way her mother had shouted at Oban during dinner. She had wanted to defend him, to tell everyone that her brother didn't deserve such cruelty, but fear had tied her tongue. Days later, she stepped into the courtyard and heard her mother's voice floating through the air as she chatted with the neighbors. At first, Zina thought it was just ordinary talk, but then the words grew sharper, filled with pride that chilled her to the bone. Her mother laughed as she told them how she had finally put that useless boy in his place. She spoke as though it was an achievement, her tone filled with satisfaction. The neighbors listened, nodding, some whispering, and Zina's stomach twisted. But what hurt more than the pride was the lie that followed. Her mother didn't tell them she had chased Oban out. Instead, she painted him as a disgraceful son who had abandoned his family on his own, as if he had chosen to shame them. She spoke about him like he was a burden lifted from her shoulders, someone unworthy of belonging. Zina froze, her heart heavy with disbelief. She could hardly recognize the woman speaking. This was not just anger anymore. This was betrayal. Her mother was not only pushing Oban away, but also destroying his name, turning him into a villain in the eyes of others. The very community that should have felt sympathy would now see him as a selfish boy who had walked away. Tears filled Zina's eyes as she realized how deep her mother's rejection ran. It wasn't only about driving Oban from the house, it was about erasing him, making him appear like the enemy of his own family. Zina pressed her hands to her chest, torn between confronting her mother and keeping silent. She wanted to shout the truth, to tell everyone that Oban hadn't left by choice, that he was pushed out like an unwanted shadow. In that moment, Zina's love for her brother deepened. She knew Oban's pain was far greater than she had imagined, and now she also carried the weight of knowing their mother's cruelty was not just private, it was public. What shocked her most was that the betrayal came from the one person meant to protect them both. Baba Sefu had always been a man who kept peace in his house by staying silent. When his wife told the neighbors that Oban had abandoned them, he chose to believe her words. He thought to himself, why would a son walk away from his own family unless he wanted to? The story made him feel betrayed. He carried quiet anger in his chest, wondering why Oban had left without looking back. Every time he saw Zina's sad eyes, he brushed it aside, convincing himself that his wife could not be lying. But the silence in the house grew heavier with each passing day. There was no sound of Oban's footsteps, no quiet voice asking for help with chores, no presence in the corner of the room. Sefu missed his son, though pride and confusion kept him from searching. Weeks passed until one hot afternoon, fate placed the truth before his eyes. On his way back from the market, he stopped near a roadside stall to rest. That was when he saw him, Oban. His son stood there barefoot, carrying bundles of firewood, sweat running down his face. And beside him was an elderly woman, Mama Deka, guiding him gently as though he were her own child. Sefu froze, unable to move. Oban's clothes were worn, his hands rough from hard work, but his face carried no shame. He was surviving the only way he knew how. Baba Sefu's heart sank. His wife had told everyone that Oban had left proudly, that he had chosen to abandon his family. But here was his son, struggling to earn a meal, standing under the burning sun with no help except from a stranger. Sifu's chest tightened with guilt. He realized then that he had not only failed to protect his boy, but had also allowed lies to poison his trust. He stood there hidden, watching Oban hand a piece of firewood to a customer with quiet determination. The sight burned him deeply. His son had not left, because he was rebellious. He had been pushed away, forced to survive in the harshest way. Confusion gnawed at Sefu's mind, but guilt tore at his heart even more. He thought of all the nights Oban must have slept hungry, of all the times he must have wished for a father's embrace. That day, Baba Sefu could no longer deny the truth. He had been blind, and his blindness had cost his son dearly. Baba Sefu could not hold his silence any longer. After seeing Oban struggling to survive, the image of his son's tired face haunted him every night. Finally, one afternoon, he gathered the courage to approach him. The sun was blazing, and Oban stood by the roadside, carrying a heavy bundle of firewood on his thin shoulders. Sweat trickled down his forehead, his body trembling from exhaustion, yet he kept working. Sefu's heart ached at the sight, and without thinking, he called out, "Oban!" The boy turned slowly, his eyes widening when he saw his father standing there. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy and painful. Then Baba Sefu's voice cracked as he asked the question that had been burning inside him. "Oban, why did you stop coming home?" His words were filled with hurt, confusion, and the guilt of a father who could not understand why his own child had vanished from his life. Oban's chest rose and fell, his lips trembling. He had carried the weight of those words for weeks, replaying them in his mind, but hearing them from his father's mouth broke the dam inside him. Tears blurred his vision, and with a shaky voice, he whispered the truth. He told his father about that night at dinner, about how his mother's words had cut through his soul like knives. "Get out and never come back." The words spilled out of him, raw and painful. He told Sefu how he had walked into the night barefoot, carrying nothing but shame, how he had cried silently on the roadside until Mama Deka found him. He told him how every step away from the house had felt like walking away from love that never really existed. Oban's voice shook as he confessed that he had waited for his father to come after him, to ask if he was okay, but no one came. Baba Sefu stood frozen, his heart pounding in disbelief. He could hardly breathe as he realized the woman he loved, the wife he had trusted, had spoken such cruel words to their own son. His hands trembled, his throat tightened, and guilt rushed over him like a flood. He wanted to take the words back, to erase the pain in Oban's eyes, but it was too late. His silence had already wounded his boy more than anything else. In that moment, Baba Sefu saw the truth laid bare. Oban had not abandoned them. He had been cast out, broken by the very person meant to protect him. And as the sun burned above them, father and son stood together, both shattered by the cruelty of a truth that could no longer be hidden. Baba Sefu walked home that evening with his chest burning. Oban's words replayed in his head again and again, cutting him deeper each time. He could still see the pain in his son's eyes, the way his voice shook as he repeated the sentence that had driven him away. By the time Sefu reached the house, his anger was boiling over. He pushed open the door and called for his wife, his voice trembling not just with rage, but with years of guilt he had tried to bury. She appeared calm as ever, wiping her hands on her wrapper as though nothing in the world was wrong. "Where is Oban?" he demanded, his eyes blazing. "What did you say to him that night? Tell me the truth." For a moment, she stood in silence, but then a small, bitter smile spread across her face. "So he told you," she said flatly. "Good, then you know. I never wanted that boy in this house. I only kept him because you insisted. Zina is the only real child I have, the only one who matters." Her words hit Sefu like a hammer. He stumbled back, his knees weakening as if the floor itself had betrayed him. "What are you saying?" he whispered, his voice almost breaking. "Oban is your son, our son." But she shook her head without remorse. "No, Sefu. He was always a mistake to me. Weak, unwanted, nothing like Zina. I was tired of pretending, so I told him the truth. And now he is gone. Isn't that what you wanted too? Peace in this house." Seifu's heart collapsed under the weight of her cruelty. All the nights he had chosen silence, all the times he had believed her words over Oban's quiet suffering, flashed before him. He saw his son walking away barefoot, not because he wanted to, but because he was thrown out like trash. He realized then that he had failed Oban in the worst way, not by shouting, but by staying silent when the boy needed him most. The woman standing before him felt like a stranger. Her coldness, her lack of regret, froze him to the core. He no longer saw a wife. He saw the person who had poisoned their home and broken their family. Tears filled his eyes as the truth settled in. The son who should have been cherished had been cast aside, and he, as a father, had done nothing to stop it. That night, Baba Sefu's world crumbled. His marriage, his trust, his belief in the woman he loved, all shattered in an instant. And in the middle of the wreckage stood a boy he had failed, a son who had needed him more than anyone else. Zina had been living in silence, torn apart by everything happening around her. Every day she watched her mother speak of Oban as though he had never been part of the family. She heard her call him useless, ungrateful, and shameful. Each word pierced Zina's heart because she knew the truth. She had been there that night. She had heard the command that broke her brother. Get out and never come back. But fear had kept her quiet, trapped between the love she carried for her brother and the control her mother held over her. After her father confronted their mother, Zina stayed hidden in the corner, listening to the argument unfold. When her mother coldly admitted she never wanted Oban, Zina felt something inside her snap. She could no longer pretend. Oban was her brother, the one who always shared his little with her, the one who stood in her shadow, yet never showed jealousy. He had been her protector in small ways, her quiet comfort, and now he was the one being cast aside. The thought of leaving him to face life alone became unbearable. That night, Zina packed a small bag. Her hands shook as she folded her clothes, not because she was unsure, but because she knew what this choice meant. By leaving, she would break her mother's heart further, deepen the bitterness already growing inside her. Yet by staying, she would betray her brother, who had never betrayed her. She walked out of the house with silent steps, carrying not only her belongings, but also the heavy decision that would change everything. When Oban saw her approaching Mamadika's small home, his eyes widened in disbelief. "Zina," he whispered, unable to understand why she was there, but she walked straight to him, her eyes filled with tears and determination. "I cannot let you stand alone," she said softly. "If you were forced out, then I will walk out too. You are my brother, and I choose you." Oban's heart swelled at her words. For weeks he had carried the weight of rejection, feeling unwanted and forgotten. But in that moment, he felt strength returning to him. Zina's choice was more than a gesture. It was a shield, a promise that he was not abandoned. The two of them stood together, bound not by the approval of their mother, but by the bond of blood and love. Back at the house, their mother's anger grew when she realized Zina had left. To her, it was betrayal. To Zina, it was freedom. Her decision planted a new courage in Oban, reminding him that even in the darkest rejection, love could still find him. For the first time, Oban no longer felt like a lost boy. With Zina by his side, he began to feel like a brother, like a son, like someone who still belonged. The village was never silent for long. Words traveled quickly from one compound to another, carried by whispers and curious eyes. At first, people believed the mother's story, that Oban had abandoned his family out of pride. They shook their heads at him, calling him ungrateful. But as days turned into weeks, small pieces of truth began to slip out. Some neighbors overheard the harsh words she had shouted that night. Others noticed how Zina quietly left the house with a bag, refusing to return. Slowly, the picture changed, and people began to see that Oban had not left because he wanted to. He had been pushed away. The same neighbors who once repeated the mother's lies now lowered their voices when she walked past. They wondered how a mother could speak with such pride about chasing her own child into the night. Mothers in the community pulled their children closer, shaking their heads in disapproval. Fathers muttered that no son deserved such rejection. What was once gossip turned into judgment, and her cruelty became the story everyone spoke of. Inside the house, Baba Sefu could no longer live in peace. The walls felt colder, the silence heavier. His wife's voice, once commanding, now rang bitter in his ears. Every time he thought of Oban, he saw his son's tired eyes, the firewood on his shoulders, and the tears he had tried to hide. Guilt consumed him until he realized he could no longer remain in a place that had destroyed his son. One morning, Baba Sefu made his decision. Without a word to his wife, he packed a small bag and walked out of the house he had built with his hands. His steps carried him to Mama Deka's little home, where Oban and Zina now stayed. When Oban opened the door and saw his father standing there, bag in hand, his breath caught. But this time there was no anger in Sefu's eyes, only sorrow and determination. "I failed you," Baba Sefu said quietly, his voice breaking, "but I will not fail again. From today, I stand with you." Oban and Zina exchanged a glance, their hearts softening. The home that had once been filled with rejection was no longer their home. Their true home was here, in this small space, where love and protection finally surrounded them. And though they had lost the place they grew up in, they had found something far greater, a family rebuilt on truth, not lies. Oban never looked back at the house where he had once begged for love. That place was only bricks and dust now, a cage that had broken him too many times. With Zina at his side and Baba Sefu standing close, he felt something he had never known before: safety. Together they shared meals, worked in the fields, and laughed in the evenings. For the first time, his heart was light. He no longer carried the weight of trying to prove himself to a mother who would never see his worth. The community watched quietly as Oban grew stronger. They saw him carry himself with dignity, no longer bowed under shame. Neighbors who once pitied him now admired his courage. They whispered that the boy who was thrown out had become the man who stood tall. Zina found her voice too, no longer afraid of her mother's shadow, while Baba Sefu softened with every passing day, making up for the years he had been silent. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold, Oban stood outside his new home. Children ran past, chasing each other with laughter, and he smiled. He realized that sometimes walking away did not mean losing. It meant choosing peace over pain, truth over lies, and freedom over chains. When asked if he would ever return, Oban's answer was calm, steady, and filled with strength. "Sometimes leaving is not the end," he said softly, his eyes shining with hope. "It is the beginning of finally being whole." And with those words, he closed the chapter of his old life forever, not as a broken son, but as a man who had risen above it all.